Canonicity of Susanna. He's wondering why isn't Susanna in the book. More persuasive is the view of Solomon Zeitlin and S.B. Honig that Susanna was finally rejected by the Jewish fathers because in its present form the story clearly contradicts a Pharisee halacha in the Mishnah. And he goes on to say everything that we said so far, so I won't repeat it again. This is essentially what we know from modern scholarship. Now, there's no question that this is all very sound. Maratz Chayes is right on the money. But we have to ask ourselves whether this was really in the mindset of Chazal. Is this the reason why Chazal rejected, or the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, whoever made the decision, is this the reason why the book of Susanna was rejected by the early authorities? And I now want to take the time to engage together with you in an investigation which will raise some questions about everything that's been said till now. Some interesting questions. So would you look at passage 2? You have in front of you. And those of you who can follow in the biblical Hebrew, fine. And below it you have the passage translated into English. I have really nothing to add here. These are a series of verses in Yirmiyahu Perek Chavtet. Beyond what these verses say, we know nothing. That is, what the verses say is that there were two false prophets by the name of Achav ben Koloya and Tzidkiyahu ben Maaseya. And other than what it says here about them, we know nothing about them. That is, they appear nowhere else in Tanakh. We have no extra biblical evidence about these two people. It's a total mystery. And in fact, if you look in the Mefarshim on Tanakh, you'll find nothing about them. If you open up Sefer Yirmiyahu and study with Radak or whoever you want, Mitzudos and so on, not a word is said. We know nothing about these two people. These are the only mentions of these two people in all of Tanakh. But it does say something about them in these verses, as you can see, especially in verse 23. Yan asher asu nevala b'Yisrael, vayinafu et neshereihem, vayidabru davar b'shmi sheker. So these two false prophets committed adultery, and aside from committing adultery, they spoke false prophecy. That is, they spoke in the name of God, whatever it is that they spoke in the name of God. Matters ashalot tzivitim, and they die, as you can see in verse 22, a horrible death. They are burnt to death. More about that. We know nothing else about these two people. This is it, what you have in front of you. Chazal, page 2, passage 3, know a lot more about these two prophets. A lot more. And again, those of you who can follow in the Aramaic, it's in brackets for you, the Talmudic passage in Sanhedrin 93a. And I even put in a little pisuk to make it a little easier. Those of you who want to read it in English translation, you have the complete passage in Chazal before you, which gives much more information. This fills in the gaps of the biblical passage. And it turns out there's a relationship between the different parts of the verse. That is, these are false prophets who commit adultery. Their adultery is bound up with their false prophecy. And that's, of course, the beautiful exegesis of Chazal as we have it described here in great detail. So these two prophets gang up, as it were. In this passage in Chazal, it's against Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. We have other parallel passages in Medrash Rabbah and Tanchuma and so on, where it's Nebuchadnezzar's wife, and still other variant readings. We have all sorts of different accounts of this story, but the major themes are more or less as described here in Sanhedrin 93a. For those of you interested, and you should be interested in seeing all the parallel passages, you'll find them in references to them in Louis Ginsberg's Legends of the Jews, in the complete full set, in the notes. You can examine the notes on, examine the index on these two prophets, on Achav and Tzidkiah, and you'll find everything you need to know in terms of other passages of Chazal about it. This passage in Chazal sounds a lot like Susanna. It's not very different than the story of Susanna. The major themes are all here. But Susanna's name doesn't occur here. In fact, here the victim is, as you can see, Nebuchadnezzar's daughter. Now what's amazing is, if if you examine early literature, like Philo, Josephus, or church fathers, and we're going to be looking at church fathers now, contemporaries of the Tanaim and the Amoraim, in some cases predecessors of the Tanaim and Amoraim, they also preserve biblical traditions. Not only Chazal preserved biblical traditions, but Origen, Tertullian. I couldn't make sense out of this biblical verse. And you have to remember, Jerome had to translate the verse from the Greek into Latin, and or from the Hebrew into Latin, as he read Hebrew as well, and he had the Hebrew in front of him. And Jerome lived where? Where did Jerome live? No, in Bethlehem, right? Beit Lechem, Beit Lechem Yehuda. He lived in the heart of Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Amoraim. He was surrounded by Amoraim. And Jerome tells us, on occasion, that when he came to a difficult verse, so what do you do if you have a difficult verse? Where do you turn to? You go to an expert. You ask your local rabbi. So Jerome writes in his commentaries, and he wrote extensive commentaries on all of Tanakh. And in his commentaries he writes, when I got to this verse, I had no idea what the verse meant. And I went to the local rabbi and I asked him, tell me, what do you rabbis say? His local rabbi is an Amora. And he records all sorts of such interpretations. Some of them we have in the Gemara, exactly as he records them, exactly as he heard them. And others we don't have in the Talmud. We only have Jerome's recording of what he heard from the rabbis. Jerome was a Christian. He'd be very angry at you if you suggested that he was a Jew. Yeah, no, he was. No. Jerome was a Christian. Yeah, the author of the Vulgate.